Hello, today we're joined by Dr. Norman Finkelstein, political science, author, professor, and one of the most outspoken critics of Israeli politics and US foreign politics in the Middle East. He completed his PhD in international relations at Princeton University and has taught in various universities around the United States. His work, including the widely discussed Gaza An Inquest into its Martyrdom, takes a hard look at Israel's repeated assaults on Gaza and what he calls the international community's complicity through silence. He has spent decades challenging dominant narratives around Israel and Palestine. Mr. Finkelstein, thank you so much for your availability.
Thank you for having me.
So, what happened in the past 24 hours changed a little bit the beginning of this question. So, again, in the past 24 hours, Israel carried out an airstrike on multiple Iranian military and non-military targets, killing several senior officials as well as civilians. In response, Iran launched missile attacks on major Israeli cities, including Tel Aviv, just a few hours ago. This situation clearly raises disturbing possibilities, such as a large-scale war involving the United States alongside Israel. But how do you see this regional conflict affecting Gaza and the situation there in terms of immediate humanitarian impact and long-term political consequence, as well as Israeli strategy?
Well, first of all, the Israeli attack on Iran was, to a large extent, predictable. Obviously, many people have been talking about it, but it's my opinion that within the context of the aftermath to October 7th, it became more probable on April 19th, 2024, which is more than a year ago. I wrote an article on my Substack account entitled something in Cassandra. I can't now recall the title. In any event, I said that it's just the nature of Mr. Netanyahu he's very predictable in trying to take advantage of opportunities. Now, that might sound like a truism or a cliche or a commonplace, but there is something particularly pronounced about Netanyahu that when a political opportunity uh, shows itself, he jumps at the possibility to exploit the opportunity. And October 7th, it was clear, it was a crisis at the beginning, for sure, but there's a cliche every crisis is also an opportunity. So October 7th obviously opened up the opportunity to solve for once and for all the Gaza question. And the Israelis were very straightforward about that. You didn't need to infer anything. It was clear they were going to commit some form of massive destruction in Gaza to, for once and for all, solve the Gaza question. And that took three basic forms. It took the form of one, ethnic cleansing, two, making Gaza unlivable for the not even the foreseeable future, far into the future, make Gaza unlivable, and three, just outright genocide. So the Gaza component went according to plan. And now Gaza is unlivable. There's still a humanitarian catastrophe, but even if the humanitarian catastrophe were solved, that is to say, massive aid were admitted to Gaza, it wouldn't change the fact that Gaza is no more. Gaza is gone. There's nothing left there. 90% of the housing is gone. More than half the hospitals are gone. More than half the universities are gone. The arable land in eastern Gaza has been destroyed. There's nothing left in Gaza. The sanitation, the water, it's all gone. So they succeeded in their first goal. By the way, I think this notion that their goal was to dismantle Hamas is completely laughable. It's never been about Hamas. It's been about solving the Gaza question, the final solution to Gaza. And then, because it was such a big opportunity for Netanyahu, there were two other uh, items on the agenda to exploit. One was Hezbollah, and the second was Iran. And Hezbollah, they succeeded. Hezbollah has been neutered. Uh, and now I wrote on April 19th they were going to go after Iran. Uh, in this particular juncture, everybody's been talking about the possibility of a war between Iran and Israel, but it was this special juncture, namely the events of October 7th and the reflexive reaction of Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, to exploiting an opportunity. And I wrote in the article, it was called Samson and Cassandra. Samson and Cassandra. I wrote in the article, Iran has no choice because you cannot reason with Israel. It's not possible.
So, even when some dissenting voices have started to speak out against Israel's atrocities, these criticisms have mostly focused, at least in Europe, on Netanyahu's role. Yet, the oppression of Palestinians is not new or something that started on October 7th, of course. And a recent poll by Penn State University published in Haaretz shows that 82% of Israeli Jews support the deportation of Palestinians from Gaza. And furthermore, 47% said that the Israeli army should act like the Israelites in the biblical conquest of Jericho, so killing all its inhabitants. Um, how do these realities fit into the history of Israel as a state and as a nation? And what role do terms like Zionism or anti Semitism have in this story?
Well, let me return to where I was a moment ago and incorporate the second question. Uh, Once Israel set its sights on Iran and decided this was the opportunity of a lifetime, that what happened October 7th can be exploited not just to solve the Gaza question, not just to neuter Hezbollah, but their big regional concern has been Iran since the Iranian Revolution. And this was their opportunity. Once Iran was in Israel's sights, there was nothing Iran could do. There was no possibility of Israel being responsive to diplomacy, Israel finding a compromise. That's just not in Israel's DNA. And I said that. That's why I called the article Samson and Cassandra, because Israel will sooner bring down the temple and destroy everything once it has its sight on Iran. Israel is not a rogue state, in my opinion. A rogue state is a state which, uh, you might say, doesn't uh, is not responsive to international law, to certain norms among states. Israel is beyond that. Israel is a completely lunatic state. It's out of control. You mentioned one statistic about half of Israeli Jews, about half of Israeli Jews support the extermination of everybody in Gaza. Another poll from last week, it showed that 63% of all Israelis, which means about 70% of Israeli Jews, 70% of Israeli Jews believe there are no civilians in Gaza. which is just another formula for genocide. It means everybody is a combatant, everybody being a combatant, everybody is game, is uh, can in their minds legally be killed. So you're dealing with a very anomalous situation, a very uh, um, dangerous situation. Some people say, well, Israelis went crazy after October 7th. Hey, I live in the United States. We had our 9/11. There was no hysteria like there is in Israel against Muslims in the US. On the contrary, even President Bush went out of his way to publicly demonstrate this is not a war against Islam. My memory is he went to a mosque or some gesture. I can't remember exactly what it was. No, this is not a response to October 7th, which is a crazy state. It's this fanatically Jewish supremacist state for whom it's true Arabs and Muslims are at the bottom of the great chain of being. But all non Jews are in the subhuman category. There are different degrees for sure. But if you're not Jewish, you are a subhuman for these Israelis.
So do you think the component of Zionism has only slightly to do with it, but it's more?
The Zionism element, look, I don't like cliches. I don't find them useful. But the notion that it's a settler-colonial state, and any settler-colonial state has to create an ideology to justify the expulsion and extermination of the indigenous population. That's a component. I'm not going to deny that. You see it, look, if you go back and look at the history of America and the attitude towards Native Americans, it was, in large part, it was exterminationist. It was. I'm talking about across the board. You take even a great figure, African American figure, like Frederick Douglass. He was a great abolitionist, African American abolitionist opposing slavery. Even when you read him, when it came to Asian Americans, he was awful. Excuse me. When it came to Native Americans, he was awful. It was awful. So the idea of this settler colonialist mental state such that they justify expulsion, justify extermination. Yeah, that's a component. But I think it's a compounding of the chosenness, the settler colonialism, the phenomenal secular success of Jews. That goes to your head. When Jews like to brag, 20% of the Nobel laureates are Jewish. All the great figures in the modern world, Marx was Jewish, Freud was Jewish, Einstein was Jewish. That kind of secular success, earthly success, it goes to your head. And when you combine all of those aspects, and there are others, the country is it's unhinged. I don't think, my personal opinion, I don't think on a broad popular level, I do not think Nazi Germany is this bad. No. I think about it, I think about it a lot. You don't see the evidence for it. The Germans, I'm not saying there was much truth to it, but they had the alibi. It was a totalitarian state. No dissent was possible except if you get, thrown in jail, tortured, and killed. the um, there was very little possibility of resistance in Nazi Germany, and it was very, look, the Germans knew enough to know something was horrible was happening because half of the extermination did not occur in the death camps. Half the Jews were just lined up and shot dead. So, places like Baba Yar, where they lined them up, tens of thousands were killed. So it's being done in the open. The Germans know. They talk among each other. They come back. They talk. There was enough knowledge that the German alibi of we didn't know or we couldn't, there was no place to dissent. It's a very thin alibi. The Israelis have no alibi. Everything's being done out in the open. These Israeli soldiers, they post the videos of the atrocities they're committing. Israel has the highest usage per capita of the web of any country in the world.
And what role does it play,
They
the fear
don't know what's happening. Oh, the fear?
of being attacked, of not existing anymore, of being the only place in what does it play with? I'm not saying at the high levels, but with the population, with being raised in a, as they say, in a region that is hostile to you.
Well, you can have fear, but even in the knowledge of fear, you don't celebrate mass murder. They celebrate it. They don't speak with a tremulous, that means like a shaking voice. They're not speaking the language of fear. They're speaking the language of sadism. I think it's a difference. The fear, it's an argument. They've been brainwashed to believe that everybody wants to kill them. The Holocaust hysteria, the hysteria fabricated by the Holocaust industry. Yeah, I think that's a completely legitimate point, but that doesn't explain the sadism, the sheer joy that they exhibit as they visit death, destruction, torture on people, on Arabs. Not that it's a major part, but if you read the human rights reports, the sorts of sexual torture, sexual humiliation, sexual degradation, that's not born of fear. That's not born of fear.
Right. And in 2 weeks ago, in your interview with Piers Morgan, you said that it was easily predictable that the aid organized by Israel and the United States would become a trap. So I think I mention it now because I think it does fit into an idea of beyond beyond the war, beyond atrocities. And I wanted to ask you, how was it so predictable, and has Israel used it before?
All you have to know is Israel. They did it last year. It was called the Flower Massacre, where all the Palestinians are desperately hungry. This is not the first time they've had starvation in Gaza. Last year, and all the Palestinians converged on this truck that had aid. Israel just shot at them, killed them. So it was perfectly obvious what was going to happen. You have to remember that the foreign doctors serving in Gaza now, 63, I think it was, 63 doctors, nurses, other medical personnel signed a statement that Israel was targeting the children in Gaza, targeting their skulls and their chests. You saw that during the Great March of Return in March 2018. They were targeting double amputees. Now, can that be explained by fear? No, no. We have to be honest about these things. This is a very sick place. And that's what makes it the most dangerous.
Yeah.
That's why we're in a very, very tough situation now. Iran cannot back off. It cannot. Unless it completely capitulates, which it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
In your 2018 book, Gaza, an inquest into its martyrdom, 2018, sorry, you carefully documented Israel's military assaults and the illegal actions that they were dragging on. But can you explain why you chose to frame Gaza's suffering as a case of martyrdom? Because I feel like this has only become truer.
Listen, I read a lot. I respect the life of the mind. But at the end of the day, I am my parents' son. I lived my parents' horror my whole life with them. From to the last day of their life. The war meaning World War II. The war was present every day of their lives. My mother referred to her suffering during World War II. She referred to it as a martyrdom. That was the term that she used. My mother was very fluent in English. She knew Latin, she knew French, she knew English. And her choice of words was not arbitrary, it was not capricious. She described it as a martyrdom. And in my opinion, if you know the whole history of Gaza since 1948, it's a martyrdom. It's people who have been, I was going to use the word crucified, but I'm not going to. People whose lives have been repeatedly shattered, obliterated over and over and over again for nothing. For nothing. For the refusal to leave. And even at the last point, probably most of them would leave, but they can't leave. They're trapped in what many people, including many Israelis, have called a concentration camp. They're trapped. That's a martyrdom, in my opinion.
And what do you think? You
can't appreciate the martyrdom unless you know the details.
Right.
You can't appreciate it.
What do you think is ahead for Gaza and for Israel?
I don't think there's anything left in Gaza. Israel achieved its goal. That's why when you hear all these commentators say Israel hasn't achieved its goal, of course it achieved its goal. But you have to understand what the goal was. The goal was never to defeat Hamas. The goal was to solve the Gaza question, and they did. What are the people going to do in Gaza now? You think once the cameras are off Gaza, you think Israel is going to admit food? You think Israel is going to admit aid? You think Israel is going to allow Gaza to reconstruct? They spent 20 months turning Gaza into a parking lot. And do you think after 20 months of turning Gaza into a parking lot, they're suddenly going to do an about face and say, oh yes, let's bring in cement and let's rebuild everything? It's not serious. That's just so idiotic. So Gaza's gone. I think by hook or by crook, people will begin to leave. They'll figure out ways to get out. The Gazans are very resourceful, as you can imagine. And they'll figure out ways.
And so, for example, the European Union is starting before this attack on Iran to take a stance after 20 months.
So you know what they did? The European Union understood that we're at the last stage. And then Netanyahu is going to try a massive explosion. He may know if a full-scale war breaks out with Iran, he's going to empty out the West Bank too. So they didn't want to have the dirty hands when Israel pushes 1 million people into the Sinai. So they want to be able to say retroactively, we condemned it. Let's forget about the 20 months preceding, but we condemned it, the last month. That's all they're doing. They know what's coming, and they didn't want their hands to be dirtied, or hoping, which most people will, hoping the 20 months preceding will be forgotten. And so Starmer would say, well, and Macron will say, and the Canadian head of state will say, we condemned the expulsion. Right? And everyone will repeat it. It was like in the war in Vietnam. You two are way too young to remember. By 1968, the feeling was the war was lost. And so a lot of folks who had supported the war up until 68, they did a turnaround. And then everyone, in retrospect, then when the war was over, they began to praise them. They were anti-war. No, you weren't anti-war. You were only anti-war when the war was lost. That's when you became anti-war. But before 68, when the US was dropping the equivalent of 2 atomic bombs in Vietnam every month, they weren't against the war. They turned against the war when the war was lost. And then they became heroes. They were no, you weren't anti-war. You were anti-war when it was convenient.
Why is Europe strategically has been so prone to follow Israel all the way? What are Europe's interests in?
There are basically two. One is the cowardice, the moral cowardice, the fear of the United States, pathetic, pitiful. And the other thing is they hate Muslims. Italians hate Muslims. And so they have as much of a loathing for Muslims as Israeli. Well, maybe not as much, but it's there. It's there. And you don't have to deny facts. Yeah, there is a problem with assimilation of Muslims in Europe. I recognize that. And those are always difficult questions, how you achieve it. United States, the cliche, we're a nation of immigrants. And there is a capacity for the U.S. I don't know the reasons. I've not studied it. But the U.S. seems to have much less difficulty than Europeans to assimilate foreigners.
One thing that this makes me ask is there is a difference between the people in Europe, for example, students, as well as in the United States, and what has happened with the governments. But do you think, and this is also something.
You know what? There are a lot of European countries that are electing or have very large xenophobic right-wing parties. So that distinction, it's like the same thing in Israel. They say, well, if you're a leftist, you're supposed to make a distinction between the state and the people. Sometimes that distinction is valid. Guess what? Sometimes it's not.
In democracies, it's not.
Well, sometimes in democracy, the opposition to the war in Vietnam was much greater among the people than it was at the state level. I mean, that's correct. There are moments when there's a real gap that opens up between state policy and popular opinion. I get that. But no, Europe is moving rapidly to the right, and that's representative of popular opinion. That's clearly the case in Italy. It's clearly the case in France. Probably only a matter of time before it's the case in the UK, where xenophobic governments are coming to power on a popular wave. That's, of course, the case now with the US with Trump.
Yes. And talking about that, Trump has been very repressive, of course, with student uprisings, but as
No, I
well
don't think
has
that's
been Biden.
Yeah, I don't
Right.
think that's correct. I think the repression began under Biden.
No, exactly. That's what I wanted to say, is that everybody focuses on Trump, but the repression happened before. So it's not about left or right when it comes to Palestine.
All the encampments were crushed under Biden. The fake hysteria about anti-Semitism on the college campuses, that all began under Biden. The ousting of the college presidents that occurred under Biden. It was the Biden administration. The Biden administration presided over the genocide in Gaza. I mean, Trump hasn't done much. But that's only because there's not much left to do. It's already gone.
But what I'm saying is that that's considered by many the left, opposing to, like, Trump is considered the right. But this genocide started under a democratic government.
Yeah, and it was completely financed. I mean, how much? What could Israel? You saw exactly what Israel could do without U.S. support. Trump said he's signing a ceasefire. You know, the first hostages exchanged. Israel didn't want to. Guess what? It took one diplomat to go to him, and it was over. Netanyahu.
What is the grip that Israel holds over the United States, in your opinion?
When you say the grip, there is, when the U.S. resolves that Israel is harming its interests, Israel stops. Trump may decide that now, and then the Iran thing will be over. You know, Trump is so, everyone ridicules him, so it takes exactly zero cowardice. Excuse me. It takes exactly zero courage to ridicule him. He's so primitive in his instincts. The moment you saw what unfolded yesterday, the expression immediately leapt to mind. You know the expression gunboat diplomacy?
Yeah.
Okay, it's an expression from American history. It's when a country got too rebellious, and we would send in our gunboats and just shell the gunboat diplomacy. So if a country gets out of hand, you know, a revolution or something, and we don't like it, we just shell it. We send in gunboats. Later it became the CIA, then you overthrew governments. But before that, it was gunboat diplomacy. So it's so obvious what happened yesterday. What happened was Trump wants to force Iran to its knees. So it gives the green light to Israel to carry out a large-scale attack, but not a colossal attack. And the expectation is, it was like with the gunboats. You go into the harbor of what we used to call in our country a banana republic, you know, in Central America. You go into the harbor, shell the capital with your gunboats, and then the country gets to its knees. Okay? So Trump, gunboat diplomacy in his head, he says, all right, let the Israelis go in. They kill about 3 scientists, 3 military commanders, blow up 1 reactor, apparently not the main one. And then they expect Iran to be on its knees. That's how they think. Now, I don't think Iran has that option. There's no way. So then Trump will force them to sign the agreement he wants them to sign. That's his thinking. After the gunboat diplomacy, they'll be forced to sign the agreement he put to them. That's just signing an agreement to your enslavement. They want to enslave Iran.